Thank you. And again, I'd like to thank the two previous speakers for agreeing to take part, because they really do bring to this kind of discussion a knowledge that I don't have. I'm a putter together of other people's wisdom in the best way I can. And I really shouldn't be doing this segment of the program that I'm doing. It should be people who are genuine practitioners who are talking about what I'm going to talk about. Because I think the argument of the book is that people make the waste, and that somehow people have to be at the center of any efforts to control waste. What we found in writing the book, that we needed to try to categorize the tasks that are connected with the waste chain, if you like, and the people who actually perform those tasks. We needed to do that to try to organize our thinking about the many levels and the complexity of that movement of waste, which, as Mr. Reddy says, is the way that what is treated as unwanted material suddenly regains value. So for the book, we created 4 characters and tried to illustrate them through stories about people who perform them. These are analytical devices. In the kind of fancy literature they talk about heuristic devices. I've never been quite sure what heuristic means, but I think it means a tool that allows you to try to put a lot of uncomfortable pieces of a puzzle together into smaller, more comfortable pieces. And that's what we've done here. As I said earlier, the categories we came up with were professionals, handlers, recyclers, and facilitators. And it's those that I'll talk about for a little while this afternoon. And it's pretty obvious, of course, that you could fall into more than one of those categories. And ideally, many people do cross those boundaries. So they're very artificial, but they may help us to think of the complex pieces of this jigsaw puzzle that come together. All 4 categories are part of the chain that waste moves along as it goes from being discarded material to becoming something else, whether that's a desirable something else or in some cases an undesirable one. But nevertheless, whatever it is, waste moves and it changes. And the changes should be beneficial, can be beneficial, but certainly aren't always that way. The framework, of course, that I'm talking about that we created does not discuss the makers of waste at all. But they can be understood by the terms which people in the waste industry use to describe them. So there are things like household or domestic waste, which, as Mr. Reddy said, was once called municipal waste, but now the term seems to be domestic waste, household waste. Hazardous and toxic waste that comes from industry. Construction and demolition waste that goes with the expansion of cities and the building of buildings. And the one that's becoming increasingly important, I think, or more noticeable in the public world, is biomedical and chemical waste. Particularly biomedical. My friend Assi Doran's next book, which I will not be working on with him, is on superbugs and the expansion of superbugs from pharma industries transferring their products and their waste products into things like fish farms. A whole category of waste that has all sorts of perils involved with it. And none of these that I'm talking about involve one of the major aspects of waste, which is sewage and human waste and the processing of liquid waste. But let me talk a little bit about the 4 categories of people that I mentioned. The first that we have to take account of, because I think they are the people who have the skills to make the scientific difference that's required in treating waste, are what we call the professionals. People like Mr. Reddy, but politicians, officials, environmentally trained scientists, and of course people in the corporate sector who can see both the financial advantages and at the same time the public sanitation needs of populations. These are the people that have the professional interest in the treatment of waste, and they bring their expertise to the problems that India confronts. Again, there seem to be not nearly enough of these people who have, as the Americans would say, drunk the Kool-Aid, have got the message about why waste and the treatment of waste is absolutely vital for the long-term benefits, not just of the population of India, but as we know, waste travels across borders very effectively. We have plastic islands in the Pacific Ocean as just one example. The second category we created for our purposes were the people at the other end of the scale, if you like. If the professionals are all highly educated, or usually highly educated in a formal sense, The people who we've called handlers are probably illiterate and have very little or no education at all. They're the people who actually touch waste every day as part of their daily lives. And they range from the very poorest, who pick up what they can from the rubbish that they are allowed access to, because rubbish is valuable to some people, and the possession of rubbish will lead to fights. People will scrap over high-quality waste, of course, and people will be beaten up over it. The people at the lowest end collect and sell what they can find to someone, a kabari, a small kabari, who knows where that aggregated collection can go to make money a little farther up the chain. So the waste picker may bring a bag of plastic and a bag of glass and a sack of paper. The kabari knows where those commodities can go to move them up and gain a little bit of value for him, and this tiny recompense to the collector who's actually picked them out of the gutter. Handlers also include the people who do manual scavenging. And although manual scavenging has now been illegal for 25 years, there are still some hundreds of thousands of people who every day clean hundreds of thousands of dry latrines with bare hands and a couple of scrapers and carry the waste away on their heads. The one advantage such people have, and the manual scavenging story is brilliantly told by a Hindi journalist and author called Basha Singh, whose book is translated into English 3 or 4 years ago now in Penguin. It's called Unseen, and she follows manual scavengers around North India. It's an amazing book which doesn't have the notoriety that it deserves. So the people, they're probably at the very bottom end of this handling chain, the manual scavengers. But handlers also include people with slightly more status, slightly more access, servants of local governments who sometimes are even on the staff as permanent servants with the kinds of benefits that go with being a permanent employee. More often, though, this kind of hands-on work will be done by layers of subcontractors who are farther away from the responsibility of local government, as far away as possible, so that local governments don't have to take the blame or bear the trouble and expense of managing a large corps of waste pickers. So you subcontract down perhaps through 2 or even 3 layers of subcontractors. Some handlers belong to, and I think these are perhaps the more fortunate ones, belong to cooperatives or NGOs or trade unions, through which they sometimes are able to extract better terms and conditions involving better payment, better equipment, better training, better organization, and most important of all, better prospects. When my friend Doron has talked to waste pickers around India, and he's worked from Kerala to Varanasi and with Pune in between fairly extensively, particularly the women will say, we're doing this for our children. The women especially desperately want a better life for their kids, and they want education for the kids. And there is a terrible gender thing in this. Again, if you talk to people who are working with waste pickers, waste handlers every day, they'll say it's the women who often do the work. The men will work for 3 days, they're unreliable, they get 3 days worth of money, and then they will go off and get drunk. The women don't do this. The women work 5 days, they show up on time. And that seems to be a terrible gender fact of life. So these are the category of the people who actually touch the waste every day. There are probably between 5 and 10 million people who live off waste in one way or another at the moment. And of course the census doesn't categorize people. The census doesn't count people on the basis of do you collect waste. And so our figures are always going to be very shonky, I think, but what we can say is it's millions, not tens of thousands. The third of our categories were the recyclers, the kabaris. They're one of India's assets, and just as Mr. Reddy was saying, they're one of India's assets in this contest to contain the growing volumes of waste that middle-class, urbanized industrial society produces. And they are part of that tradition of frugality and reuse that was part of Gandhi's story of what a true Swaraj would look like. But they're also part of the story of every middle-class life. Certainly 50 years ago when I first lived in India, people really did husband, just as we've heard described this afternoon. Very, very careful. And the wonderful arguments between the lady of the house and the kabari, almost part of Indian tradition itself. Some handlers over the years may in fact become recyclers, but I don't think many manage to do that. You need, as a recycler, that little bit more expertise to know and be able to follow the price of plastic, the price of glass, the price of paper, and also to know who the next level in the chain are, where you can earn a little by selling onwards and upwards, because you as the kabari don't have the capacity yourself to process and impart new value to these things. And the kabari can deal with just about anything. The tiniest commodities. If some of you may know the story of hair, if you've had a look at the book, you'll see that Asi found one day in Varanasi a small boy picking waste out of the gutter, and he had a little plastic vessel beside it, and into the vessel he was putting strands of hair that he was picking out of the gutter and putting them into the vessel. And Asi asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm collecting hair." "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to take it home to my mother with the other waste I've picked up." And Asi said, "Can I come home with you?" So he went home and talked to the mother and some of the neighbors, and they were collecting for a man who collected all the hair from them. And Asi went to meet him, and he collected hair from the locality and gave it to someone in Varanasi who collected most of Varanasi's hair. And that in turn went to Delhi. And in Delhi, it went to the king of hair, Mr. Solanki. And if you're truly curious about this, Google Solanki, king of hair, and you'll see that he's been awarded medals by the President of India. He aggregates hair from all over India, grades it, of course, according to long black. My hair is pakka hair, and it's not worthless. It's about 5 rupees a kilo or something like. It's almost worthless, but because it's short and it's white and it's not much good for anything. But long black hair is the gold standard, and temple hair, long black temple hair, is the platinum standard. And of course, the great temples of South India auction this hair a couple of times a year, using the same auction techniques as the scrap metal auctioneers do. So they sell the product globally. And the king of hair claims on his website to export 60,000 tons of hair a month to China, where it's made into fancy wigs, and those wigs go all over the world. So that's how it goes from a strand of hair in the gutter in Varanasi to a wig on a very wealthy Jewish woman in New York, or an actor in Hollywood, or to rap artists in the West Indies and West Africa, who apparently love wigs. That's part of the garb now for particular kinds of West African and Caribbean musicians. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, of course, of the recycling story is the ship breaking at Alam in Gujarat, where they take 35,000-ton ships, beach them, and then cut them up with blowtorches for the steel and everything else in an abandoned ship. So the recycling story has many, many dimensions to it. But the factor that's important, I think, for India's story is that India was recycling with the kabari long before the word recycling came into the English language. The final of our 4 categories of people we call facilitators. And of course, you could be all 3 of the previous categories and also be a facilitator. These are the cooperatives, the NGOs, the citizens groups, and sometimes the trade unions that aim to improve public sanitation and the condition of the people at the lowest end of the waste chain. At their best, such groups embody civic public action, the sort of energy that does effect change. And as I said earlier, I think this is one of the another of India's strengths in this, is that there's still a space for that kind of civic action that may challenge governments and make governments uncomfortable, may bring governments to account by saying you're not doing what you should be doing. But again, these organizations are a patchwork around India. They're by no means pervasive, and they certainly aren't united in any way. There's good work going on of this kind in as I suggest, a patchwork around the country. So to conclude, a person can be part of more than one of these categories. It would be a very desirable thing, I think, if we found a householder who was a facilitator, who was also not afraid to get out and do some hands-on picking up of waste herself or himself, should the need arise, who knew the value of a kilo of plastic drink bottles or a kilo of paper. Such a person would would, I think, be a model for us all. Because global waste in a world of 7 billion people, which what the world population has nearly quadrupled in the last 120 years, a population of 7 billion people living more and more in urban environments is a problem and a threat for everyone, not just in India, but for everyone everywhere. My friend Doron, when he was hanging out with waste people in Kerala, met a garbage truck driver who drove a truck near Trivandrum, and he got to know him fairly well. And the garbage truck driver finally gave him the last word on the wisdom of a genuine waste handler and what it was all about. He tried to explain why it was important that he showed up for work every day, and if he couldn't show, he'd get his brother to come and drive the truck, because it was important. His daily work was really necessary for the whole of the neighborhood he was looking after, because he said, you know, waste is everyone's, but waste doesn't wait for anyone. It doesn't sort of hang around. So it was a good message to kind of take away for us, and it's a good message, I think, probably to pass on to anybody who's wonders what they should do with the plastic bottle they're about to throw out the window of the car. So thank you.